So I have great pleasure in chairing this session, which is a radiotherapy workshop session for the Innovation Forum. And we have three speakers this morning, all from the Collaboration for Cancer Outcomes Research and Evaluation at Liverpool. What we'll do is I'll ask each speaker to give their presentation. We'll take some brief questions after each speaker, but then we'll have a forum discussion at the end if there's enough time, which I think there should be. So, without any further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Tim Hanna, who is a research fellow at CCOR, to give a presentation on estimating the population benefit of radiotherapy with gynecological cancer as an example. So, welcome, Tim.
All right. Well, good morning. It's a good Canadian temperature in here. I'm from Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and I have the pleasure of being here for 2 years, doing a research fellowship and some clinical work at Liverpool Hospital, the CTC there, and CCOR and the Ingham Research Institute. So clinical outcomes data, as you know, refer to specific subgroups of gynecological cancer patients, or really if we're talking about any other cancer patient, it's the same thing. A big question is, what would the benefits of radiotherapy be for the entire population of gynecological cancer patients under the setting of optimal following of clinical practice guidelines? This would be very important to know for economic analysis, benchmarking, advocacy, and planning, yet it's not known. So the benefits of interest for our particular project, they were the radiotherapy benefit, absolute benefit of radiotherapy over no treatment in the case of radical radiation, and over surgery alone in the case of adjuvant radiotherapy. So this is comparing optimal use of radiation to the setting of no use of radiation, and that's important to consider when interpreting what we're presenting. The chemoradiation benefit was the benefit of chemoradiation over radiation alone, and this is speaking in absolute percentage. We estimated local control at 5 years and overall survival at 2 and 5 years. So we used decision trees using TreeEdge software, and this project builds on the extensive work by Prof. Delaney and Barton and many others. Extensions were added to the model for subgroups with different benefits. So, for example, among the group of bulky 1B 2A cervical cancer patients, there are different uses and different benefits of radiation: radical chemoradiation, radiation benefit, and adjuvant chemoradiation and radiation benefits. So this flow diagram just describes in brief the modeling process. We start by identifying indications by reviewing clinical practice guidelines, and then moving on to adapt the tree based on that. And this usually just refers to splitting ends of nodes into radiation and chemoradiation indications. After that, a thorough systematic review process is undertaken, and we define the indication benefits. So the benefits for the small specific groups of patients where radiotherapy is indicated. It's all put together into the model, and a population benefit is estimated. And finally, a sensitivity analysis is done to assess the robustness of the model. So using gynecological cancers as our example of this process, there were 28 guideline-supported radiotherapy indications identified and 11 chemoradiation indications. 20% of all gynecological cancer patients had adjuvant or curative radiation indications, and 10% chemoradiation indications. So when we were going through this whole process of systematic review and meta-analysis where necessary, we identified 35 relevant studies after excluding ones that were either invalid or not relevant to the specific groups. There were 2 meta-analyses, 11 randomized trials, 20 comparative series or outcome reports, and 1 publicly available population database. 11% of treated patients had radiotherapy indications supported by level 1 or 2 evidence, and 86% for chemoradiation. So this is the model in all its glory, and I just put this up simply to say that there's a lot of detail involved in this, and I'd be very happy if anyone was interested in scrutinizing some of these fine details. Happy to talk with you afterwards and provide you documentation. But this is just a high-level overview of what we did. Just to hone down a little bit on a specific group, this part of the tree that's left enlarged with the rest being collapsed, this represents endometrial cancer, specifically endometrioid subtype and stage 1. And this is the model considering patients, whether they had lymph node dissection or not, and then specific subgroups beyond that, and ultimately leading to specific groups with specific benefits. In sensitivity analysis, we found that the model was quite robust to the various uncertainties in the model. The greatest sources of uncertainty related to the optimal use of surgery as opposed to radiation in cases where these were considered equal and acceptable options. For example, in the case of bulky early cervix cancer. And just to explain what these thin bars mean, the 5-year overall survival benefit is right where that vertical line meets the horizontal axis, around 8%, and the width, those bars indicate the width of uncertainty when we vary each of those elements by the expected maximum range. So, for example, in the case of bulky cervical cancer, early cervix cancer, we're talking about just a few fractions of a percent on the overall population estimate. These are the results according to local control and 5-year overall survival, broken down by radiation and chemoradiation, and by the specific cancers and all gynecological cancers, common cancers put together. In the brackets are the 95% confidence intervals that were derived when we did a multivariate Monte Carlo sensitivity analysis, which takes into account uncertainties in the actual tree, the model itself, and uncertainties in the benefits largely relating to statistical uncertainty. We found that the model produced quite robust estimates, and that there was quite a large, relatively speaking, radiation benefit, specifically for cervical cancer, as expected, and a small additional benefit of concurrent chemotherapy and radiation together. So, in conclusion, there is a substantial radiation benefit for gynecological cancers, and this is under the condition in this model of optimal radiotherapy use. We found that the model is robust despite multiple uncertainties that exist, with the greatest impact being specifically in the case of surgery versus radical radiation for 1B, 2A cervical cancer, bulky cervical cancer. The model is flexible, and this allows its adaptation to other settings and also consideration of various scenarios, particularly modeling different scenarios of underutilization and the impact that would have. And the plan is to develop models such as this for all of the cancers, and that process is well underway. And next you'll hear from Dr. Shafiq about another one of those. So that's all. Thanks.
So are there any questions, please? There's some roving mics, so if you just put your hand up. No? Okay, we'll move on to the second speaker, and that is Jasmine Shafiq. Jasmine is also from CCOR, and she's going to talk about a similar study in lung cancer.
Can you? Sorry for that. Yep. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and sorry for a bit of technical glitch. I'm Jasmine Shafiq. I am a medical epidemiologist in background, working as a health service researcher in collaboration of Cancer Outcome Research and Evaluation, known as CCOR. And today I'll be presenting my research on an evidence-based estimation of survival and local control benefit of radiotherapy for lung cancer treatment. And first, I'd like to thank the Cancer Institute for giving me a chance to present my research, and I will acknowledge others as I work on. So why we are doing this research, and this is, as already my previous presenter mentioned, and Dr. Tim Hanna mentioned, that it is a large project. It is part of a large project that we are doing for the last 2 years, and to have a quantifiable estimation of radiotherapy treatment benefit if it is given to the patients for the first time in at their cancer treatment, and what it actually have a measurable benefit that we want to see as outcome. And so that's because we shared, the team and I have shared the different tumor sites among ourselves, sharing the same methodology, but obviously the outcomes will be different, and we plan at the end to produce a single measure applying all those models. So first, I'd like to, the research significance, some of it is quite mentioned by Tim, but I'd like to ensure that this is the, first, what inspired us to do this research is the groundbreaking research model developed by Professor Delaney and other colleagues at CCOR, who has done a radiotherapy optimal utilization model that showed that 52% of all cancer patients would need radiotherapy as their treatment as the first treatment. And then there is the extension of the model for the palliative radiotherapy also done at CCOR by CCOR's researchers that found out that only 14% of the radiotherapy indications are for palliative, and the rest, 86% of the indications of radiotherapy are for local, that curative radiotherapy, that's for the benefit, for survival or the free from local recurrence, that is the local control benefit. And another cost-effective analysis done by Professor Barton some years before for radiotherapy found out that 16% of the survival, there's a global 16% benefit for all the radiotherapy inputs in the treatment. So we have worked out a definition for this. What does this benefit means? This, by definition, it's that the additional proportion of population of cancers alive and free of local recurrence for up to 5 years after they had radical or adjuvant radiotherapy, compared with the population who had the similar clinical scenarios but didn't have the radiotherapy in their initial treatment. So the objective, as I told before, I will mention only the part of the project, that's the lung cancer. So for my studies, the objective is the evidence-based estimation of survival and local control benefit from radiotherapy and also concurrent radiochemotherapy, because lung cancer is mostly, and some of the indications will need both. So we have developed 2 models. So as you have already heard, the methods, generalized methods, first there is extension, we are doing that optimal models. that has been developed by Professor Delaney. And then we are using the decision analysis software Triage. We are extending that model. And for lung cancer, 2 models have been developed. One for radiotherapy alone versus no radiotherapy, and another one on top of it, where where radio and chemotherapy has been given concurrently, and we compared it with the radiotherapy alone benefit. So first, and summarize this method is each indication we call it the tree. It's a model, but a tree shaped, we call it tree. And each indication represents a clinical scenario where this is identified from the guidelines. For lung cancer, it was 16 national and international guidelines that we consulted to find out where the radiotherapy is recommended for the clinic based on patient population with their stage and performance status scenarios. And then for each indication has a proportion assigned to it that shows that proportion is suffering from that condition. And for each of those clinical scenarios, I defined the benefit from which I'll show a bit later how did I define it. And then from each clinical scenario or each indication, there is a benefit. If there is a benefit from the published literature, we assign to it. And ultimately, the summation of all the indication benefits has given us a single value of overall survival benefit, 5-year overall survival benefit, and also a local control benefit. So how did I gather this? This is from the published literature review for the last 30 years, from 1990 to 2010, using the usual electronic databases, Medline, PubMed, and other OVID databases, and also from manual search of these references found through this. So this is one of and I followed the NHMRC hierarchical level of evidence, that is level 1 evidence for meta-analysis or systematic review, and the lowest level of evidence are for single institution-based case series. So you can see from here that the graph showing that the survival curves, Kaplan-Meier survival curve, is showing that radiotherapy and chemotherapy, this is for the meta-analysis findings of more than 1,000 patients with limited stage small cell lung cancer, showing that the addition of radiotherapy on top of chemotherapy has improved the survival by about 4%. So this is the measures we measure and then put into the model. Though there are parameter uncertainties using of published data, as you know, there will be selection bias, use of small sample size, variability of data from different settings. All these uncertainties we had to acknowledge, and this is the limitation of using published data. And also there is publication bias. People publish only the good results. If they have negative results, there is less tendency to publish those results. So we have all these uncertainties involved. We have the method of looking how robust is our model through univariate analysis, that I'll show later, and also multivariate Monte Carlo simulation analysis that gives us a 95% confidence interval around the figure. So this is the model for lung cancer that has out of 22 indications had radiotherapy indications, but only 9 of them have curative radiotherapy. Obviously, we can't do palliative here because we are estimating the survival and local control benefit. So 9 indications had radiotherapy benefit for survival and local control, and of them I decided, and there are some data that I have used. I'll show later. So this is just a part of that table that I created at the beginning. There was 29 studies have been identified through keyword-based search that fitted my model. And then of those 29, there was 3 meta-analyses, 10 randomized control trials, and the remaining was the case series, but multi-institutional and single institutional. when there was more for one clinical indication, if there is more than one similar quality studies, I did a meta-analysis getting to look at the single figure value. So this is the meta-analysis that I did for some of the indications that shows that it favors that the studies have been weighted, and according to that, the Cochrane Review Manager program that I used for meta-analysis, showing the weighted values of the studies, and then that all of them favors the radiotherapy. So what's the result? The results, I will be a bit quick now. So the 5-year survival benefit for radiotherapy only was 5%, with the confidence interval from the Monte Carlo simulation was 3.6 to 6.7, and for the chemoradiation is 4%. For local control, that is 11% and 5%. So this table shows the stage-based. Our model is mostly stage-based, so it showed that the maximum benefit of both for survival and local control was for stage 3 non-small cell lung cancers. And so what does it actually mean? What is the overall survival of both radiotherapy and concurrent chemotherapy showing 9%? That means that in lay terms, it means that additional 900 people's life will have survival benefit up to 5 years, and 1,600 people for 10,000 population of lung cancer patients. And in Australia, it is 10,000 people on average every year suffer from lung cancer. So putting radiotherapy optimally will gain that benefit of 900 per 10,000 and 1,600 local control benefit per 10,000. So that's also a univariate sensitivity analysis I did, showing the broad, because of the data uncertainties, and the most uncertainty was for the non-surgical benefit of stage 3, where stage 1 and 2, that's because of the studies were very less in this category and variable. And the widest variable and the widest variability and the smallest variability was for the positive lymph nodes. And we found that the variability was from 4.3% to 7.3% survival benefit. This is for survival. So at this almost concludes my session. Our future plan, as I mentioned before, development of radiotherapy benefit model for all the tumor sites that's commonly being treated by radiotherapy. And I believe that after we finish this project, we'll have a unique benchmark for the radiotherapy service delivery and in Australia and also internationally. So, lastly, I'd like to acknowledge my contribution of my colleague, Dr. Tim Hanna, who has spent a lot of time streamlining the methodology of this project, and my advice from Associate Professor Shalini Binod, who advised me on the development of this model, and my supervisors, Professor Michael Barton and Professor Geoff Delaney, for their constant support and advice on this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. Are there any questions? Yes? Just wait for the microphone, Lucy.
I'm assuming that I've understood this properly. From the percentages, does it show that the benefit from the radiation and then the concurrent chemoradiation, the concurrent was actually less? Is that right?
Yes, because it's on top of the radiotherapy alone after that. So whoever has radiotherapy, it's because on top of concurrent is on top of the radiotherapy alone benefit, and not all indications have, who had radiotherapy indication have concurrent chemoradiation. We looked at concurrent only, not other sequential chemotherapy. So that's why, for example, for small cell lung cancer, there was no concurrent radiotherapy benefit identified. So that's why this percentage, and also the benefit proportions were lesser. So that's the reason for that. So in total, if we are telling the benefit of radiotherapy, it should be in total for radiotherapy alone plus concurrent radiotherapy and chemotherapy.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you.
So our third speaker is Professor Michael Barton, who's the Director of CCOR, and he's going to give the other end of the spectrum and look at actual utilisation. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. I'm giving this talk on behalf of Dr. Gabrielle, whose PhD topic it is, and whose security alert it is, and choice of colours of background. But this is a very large project looking at the utilisation of radiotherapy in New South Wales from 2004 to 2006 by linking data from radiotherapy departments and the cancer registry and plugging that all into a graphical information system. So the aim of this was to quantify the effect of geographical variations on radiotherapy utilisation, so the difference of proportion of people who get radiotherapy from one geographic region to another, and try to identify factors that might affect this. So this idea of a utilisation rate is all cancers in New South Wales, all patients diagnosed with cancer who received at least one course of radiotherapy in the study period 2004 to 2006, divided by all the people who got a diagnosis of cancer. So in other words, what proportion of people in New South Wales and the ACT received radiotherapy at least once during that period? Easy question to ask, but quite a difficult question to answer. And the source of the data was each of the individual radiotherapy departments at that time. That was 17 departments, 17 ethics committees at the time. This was before there was a lead ethics committee. And once you get past them, there were 17 data custodians. We also looked for some comparison at the Radiotherapy Management Information System, which people might know is the system where radiotherapy departments report on their activity every year in terms of the raw numbers of new cases they've seen and some of the sort of subdivisions of it. There are a number of difficulties in estimating the radiotherapy utilisation rate. It may change with the source of the data, different inaccuracies and different ways of counting and coding new patients. People who received radiotherapy during the study period might have actually been diagnosed before it or well before it, before that study period, and because we're using a denominator that's only the people diagnosed with cancer in that period, we have to exclude all the earlier people. When we compare it to the radiotherapy management system, we know that that is not particularly accurate, but also includes a different group of people. All new courses will include those people who are not notified to a cancer registry, such as people with pituitary tumours. And we have an additional problem of New South Wales not being an island, and that people get treated across the border in Wodonga and particularly in Tugun in Queensland. So this is very brief and really doesn't indicate the vast amount of work that Dr. Gabrielle has done over many years to try to get this together, collecting and organising all the data from the radiotherapy departments in New South Wales and ACT, linking that with the cancer registry using the Centre for Health Record Linkage, which is located here in the Technology Park, geocoding all the patient addresses. All the cancer diagnoses are geocoded, but we also needed to make sure that we had the same people in geocoding the radiotherapy patients. And then to look at not just how far people are radially as the bird flies, but actually to look at road distance. The new graphic information systems allow you to measure road distance and even to calculate travel times along those roads. And then to analyse the data. So 16 departments from New South Wales and one from the ACT, which are all the departments at the time, agreed to participate. But, of course, all the departments, even though we only have 3 or 4 different information systems, even in the same information system we record the same variable in different ways. So the age may be recorded, the date of birth might be recorded a different way. And we use different variables to record the same information. So to straighten or sort all that stuff out is a major undertaking. This gives you an idea. We received 43,910 individual patient data from each radiotherapy department. When we sorted those into unique patients, there were 41,290. When we matched them to the cancer registry, we had 36,000 or so. And then when we removed the in situ and non-invasive cancers, that was another 600, nearly 700 removed. And then those patients who were diagnosed before our study period was about another 10,000. So out of our 43,000, nearly 44,000, we ended up with about 25,000 patients. And we'll just ignore the ones on the other side. We did investigate those people who didn't match to the cancer registry, and a lot of those were excluded because they were non-New South Wales residents, or they had their radiotherapy later than the date that our cut-off date. We got data from 2 cancer registries in New South Wales and the ACT, and again there is not any harmony in the way that they record or export their data fields. But quite pleasingly, and I'm sure the cancer registries are very happy with this, there are only 12 duplicates in the whole of the 2 data sets. So this shows you the 2 data sets. It was 149,000 patients all up, so having 12 duplicates is pretty good going. That's 0.1, just under 0.1%. If we looked at the invasive patients, we're down to 137,000, and then within our study period, 109, and the unique invasive records about 106,000. So that's our final denominator. Obviously we wanted to geocode these, find out, particularly was travelling distance a factor that affected the uptake of radiotherapy. And this map shows all the cases of cancer, so all those 106,000 cases of cancer. The red dots are radiotherapy given and the greens are not given. Now you'll see there's a bit of a concentration of not given in the northeast corner and on the southern borders. And that's because of this, because people are actually being treated elsewhere. These areas here, there's a few out in the western New South Wales, but not very many people live in that area. And the reason for this, what we did with this, is to calculate the road distance to the nearest radiotherapy department, even if that radiotherapy department was out of the state. And then we've excluded all the patients who lived closer to an interstate radiotherapy department. So that's that northeast corner and the area around Albury. And it's actually quite a reasonable number of patients, but very few of them. So it's about 10,000 patients, but only about 500 of that 10,000 actually received radiotherapy in New South Wales. So only about 5%, which is pretty low. What we expect from looking at the RMIS is about 35% of patients receiving radiotherapy. So I think it's quite reasonable to exclude this group because we don't have the information about them. So just to summarise that, patients who received radiotherapy in New South Wales and ACT, 43,000 was the original number we got from the raw data, over 149,000 cases, so that was about 29%. Once we narrow it down to those who received it in our time period and only invasive cancers, it's 24%, excluding that 10,000 patients who lived closer to an interstate department, we're only up to 26%. Now that is a bit of a problem because we've been thinking for many years that it's 35%, and it remains a problem. There isn't a good answer for this. But just to compare it, this is a similar sort of data set from the US, from SEER, looking at just over 1 million cancer patients, and they had a 23% uptake. So what are the factors that affect the uptake, accepting that 25% is a bit low? Certainly being older, you're less likely to receive radiation treatment, and quite a significantly less likely, so a third less likely. Being male, you're also less likely to receive radiation treatment. Now that might be particularly in the younger group because breast cancer occurs in people who are younger than men who have prostate cancer who are getting their radiotherapy later. But you can see by the time the 70-plus age group, that both groups are getting a fairly low uptake rate. So the main question of this PhD was, does travel distance affect radiotherapy uptake? And this is the answer. The answer is yes, not surprisingly. And these bars show the distance, 0 kilometres is about 26% uptake, and there's a significant downward trend as far as we measured it, which was the far right is 400 kilometres, dropping down to about 20%. So you're about 25% less likely to receive radiotherapy if you live 400 kilometres away. Now, Geoff, before we started, said he was going to ask me a question, so I'm going to preempt him now and say, he said, does this matter? Well, I think first of all, it's important from an access point of view, but also it's important from a planning point of view, because we have an idea that if you live within 100 kilometres of a department, your utilisation rate's probably not affected by distance, and that might give us an idea of what is a reasonable catchment radius for a department. And so when we go to planned departments, this will be quite useful information. Obviously, we can't always bring everybody up to the same level. I think before we go on to the issues, the other significant thing about this is that we have a utilisation rate which is lower than the indirect method. So this is the first time in Australia that it's been directly measured since a study done about 15 years ago in South Australia by David Roeder, where interestingly they came up with a very similar number. And I think what it tells us is that we are still a long way behind our benchmark, and that we need to be collecting this data on a routine basis if we're going to appropriately plan services. So there are a number of issues with the study. It has taken a very long time. There are very prolonged delays in ethics approval, in the data extraction from some departments. Some departments were not able to extract data for themselves. A lot of departments don't have the IT expertise. They're entering the data and using it clinically, but they're not able to get non-standard reports out. The process of record linkage also caused some delays, and because there's no uniformity, no standard for radiotherapy data in New South Wales, it was received in a variety of formats that caused a lot of time and effort to get it all into a standard analysable state. So, as I said, the obstacles, lack of technical staff at many departments, the change in reporting systems. Some departments had changed systems and had a whole load of archived data, which we had to go hunting up. Obviously, there was quite a bit of incomplete data, which I haven't had time to discuss. So these are Gabrielle's recommendations, that radiotherapy needs to have statewide planning. I think we've had that for some time. But obviously, planning depends on the data, and I think we've shown that there are some concerns about the data that have been used in the last 2 decades to plan radiotherapy service. And we need a minimum radiotherapy data set using ICD and a standard system of reporting. Now, there is a working group which the Cancer Institute has convened recently to start to look at some of these issues. But the data is only going to be good if we pull it out, check it, report it, and it's reported publicly so we can all scrutinise it. Thank you. So, room for a question. You've got another question?
I've still got a question. So there are some departments that now exist that weren't part of the study. Do you want to just describe?
Oh, sure. When we let me just go back to this map, because I think the map has, this is probably it slowly trying to load, has all the radiotherapy departments. Since this study period, new departments have opened in the Mid-North Coast, at Port Macquarie, Coffs Harbour, Lismore, and also in Orange. And there are departments planned for Tamworth. Central Coast is just about to open. I think Nowra is the other one. So there are a number of other departments that are opening up and will affect this. But I think this is a useful snapshot of the state of the art at the time, and it shows you how long it takes to get this. We did actually start this project. 2006 was just the year that was, I think we started this in 2007, so it's been going for a very long time. And we really need a system that's a bit more real time than that.
Could I perhaps ask each of the speakers to take a seat, and we'll open the discussion up to all 3 speakers. So are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yep. Use the microphone, Jasmine. Jasmine, use the microphone.
Microphone.
The radiotherapy episodes has been the primary only, or no retreatment allowed,
No.
calculated?
First episode.
All right. Just
I pressed the button somewhere, do I? First episode.
Peter Tracy.
Michael, I know you've done a fair bit of this work over the last 20 years. Utilisation rate hasn't really changed in that 20 years. What do we need to increase the speed at we're building radiotherapy centres and looking at where we're putting them?
What's happened is we've just kept pace with the increasing number of cancers. So we have about a 3% increase in the number of cancers every year. If you think about that 3%, we started the decade with about 30, 35 LINACs, so that means we needed one new LINAC every year, roughly, or a new department every 2 or 3 years. We've just kept pace with that. And if you wanted to overcome this gap, then you'd have to have a real bulge first. And I think it remains to be seen whether this regional cancer initiative, the Regional Cancer Centres Initiative, does that, because about a third of cancers are in the regional area, but that means 2/3 are in the metropolitan area, and 2/3 of the effort should probably go there.
So I might ask a follow-up question, Michael. So putting machines in is one solution. Do you get a feel for what the other issues are and what the possible solutions might be?
Well, obviously you need workforce, and you also need the integration of radiotherapy services into the cancer treatment model, so that people actually get referred and get treated. Without referral and being part of that multidisciplinary team, it's no good having a nice shiny facility. They would be the major issues.
Did you have a follow-up question, Peter?
Just one other one. From that map, do you see anywhere where there is a definite lack of radiotherapy?
Well, look, I think we should expand that map and look at the metropolitan region. I think the metropolitan region's where, 2/3, there's 4.5 million people in Sydney and 6 million people in the state, and there are some obviously underserved areas within the metropolitan region. It's quite easy, to do the country electorates. They're quite good come voting time, but there's a lot of regions within Sydney where the access is not fantastic, like the Northern Beaches, for instance.
Are there any other questions? Nazreen?
Michael, it's a similar question to what's been asked before, but was this going to be repeated now that we know that there are other departments that have been opened up around the place? And also would you think of looking at maybe diagnosis and stage of diagnosis in those regions, especially the rural areas, and see whether that might be also impacting radiotherapy utilisation?
There's a lot of good work on stage of diagnosis from the cancer registry, the Central Cancer Registry, showing that, first of all, the outcomes are worse in regional areas, but also that is partly due to later diagnosis, so more regional and more metastatic diagnoses in regional areas. The problem with our databases is the stage data are not fantastic. The morphology and tumour site data are quite reasonable, and I've only shown you part of this work, but we do have data on utilisation by different tumour types, and we can compare that to our benchmarks. Should it be repeated? Yes, but I think it requires a determined systematic effort on the part of the Health Ministry or the Cancer Institute to set up a system that does this routinely. This is a one-off research system, a research project.
I'll let Gabriel know that he's been asked to do it again. I think he'll have a heart attack.
Well, that's why he's fled to Egypt, I think.
Has there been any evidence, or have you come across any evidence of in the regional areas and rural areas, doctors not referring patients for radiotherapy because they think it's going to be inconvenient or a trouble to access it?
Good question.
Look, there's long-standing data that women with breast cancer are more likely to have mastectomy in the rural areas. You can easily get this data from the hospital inpatient statistics collection. 55% of women in regional areas, rural and regional areas, have mastectomy compared to 45% in the city. That's really the only data. We don't know whether that's patient choice, they don't want to travel, or whether they're not being referred. And there are not those sort of studies going particularly to individuals and ask them, did you refer or not?
But for researchers in the rural areas, that would be a very interesting study to have a look at the pattern of care and go back and ask who made the decision. I think that would be very informative. Another question over there?
Professor Barton, just wondering, this might be beyond the scope of this research study, but would this information be considered when looking at accommodation and support services to facilitate patients who have to travel a long distance being able to stay a long way from home for 6-7 weeks of radiotherapy treatment?
Obviously that's one of the factors that goes into the reluctance of people to travel. And into the planning of new services, working out what your catchment's likely to be. We don't have any direct data about it, but you can make some assumptions about what's a reasonable travelling time and distance. And we can convert these distances into times, road travel times. Obviously it's easier to do 100 kilometres or 50 kilometres in the country than it is to do 50 kilometres or even 10 kilometres around Liverpool, for instance.
Thank you for a very interesting outline. Could I ask if you've simply considered external beam radiotherapy?
Yes.
Okay.
That was an easy question.
I haven't finished. The rider is that if we're talking about future studies, looking at some of the newer techniques like brachytherapy or the accelerated partial breast treatments, whether they could be considered as being a shorter treatment time and therefore possibly more attractive to people from regional areas?
Well, the first thing I'd say is brachytherapy is actually older, or as old as external beam. But
technically, yes. I'm thinking of high dose rate, though.
Well, we've done some studies on the patterns of care of brachytherapy, and we find that if you have a brachytherapy service in your area health service, you're more likely to receive brachytherapy. That's kind of not surprising. And if you're better off and live near St Vincent's, you're more likely to get prostate brachytherapy, the seed brachytherapy. But for the other techniques, these are all factors that might affect access. I guess we also think it might free up capacity. If we use fewer fractions, we'll have more capacity. The question is that as efficacious as standard treatment? And some of the randomised data suggests it is for breast, but not perhaps for prostate, and not for all cases.
Yeah, I think it's really a plea for some of these clinical trial data and results to be included in the future planning.
Well, we have another project which has just finished looking at the optimum number of fractions, and we certainly take into account low fraction number. We've always used that as the base case and worked our way up.
I think we also need to be a little bit careful of adopting treatment for convenience rather than for better outcome. I chaired the National Breast Cancer Centre working group looking at guidelines for partial breast irradiation, and it's felt that the data are not mature enough as yet to recommend that as a standard treatment. Any other questions? I had an obvious Dorothy Dixer because I know the answer, but Michael, there's research by your group looking at survival. That's one end of the spectrum. Gabrielle's work is looking at utilisation. How do you plan to pull it all together?
All right. Well, probably not with Gabrielle's data, but with we've got the fraction data, we've got survival data, so we can actually work out a survival benefit for each fraction in the long run. And if we could cost a fraction, we can get some idea of cost effectiveness for different regimens and what sort of overall cost and benefit a service would provide if it was added to an area. So I think Jasmine presented this quite well. If we had 10,000 lung cancer patients, we'd expect an extra 900 to be alive if they all were treated according to the best evidence from our guidelines. And then, because we would know what's the average cost of a fraction, we could then work out what was the cost per life year or per life gained, and then perhaps per life year gained. So that's the ultimate way we want to tie this together.
Okay.
It's like doing an exam.
I noticed that they both took seats on your left and were almost going to be sitting behind you. Okay, if there are no other questions, please thank our speakers.